Hello, Mission Hills. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us this Labor Day weekend. I get the honor to be able to open up the Bible and teach from it today. And we're going to look at a topic that is so significant and important that you're not going to want to miss. It is joy for me to be able to open up the Bible and to be able to teach it today. So here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about reaching and keeping the next generation in one sermon. Are you ready? Strap on your seatbelts. It's going to go fast and furious, but all of us need to be involved in this because your temptation right there might have been, oh, this is for the next generation. No, it's for the older adults in the room, and it takes a whole church to come alongside and reach the next generation, have them become like Jesus and join in my mission. So turn in your Bibles, if you would, to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10 is where we're going to start. And as you're making your way there, we are getting some things tragically wrong when it comes to reaching the next generation. And I want to illustrate that in a lot of different forms today. And I know you're going to hang with me. I might lean in a few times, and you might get mad at me. That's okay. I can take it. And we'll do this thing together and journey as we move forward. As you're making your way to Mark chapter 10, starting in verse 13, which is going to be some familiar verses, particularly if you grew up in the church or you heard a sermon on this, or if you're in that old school thing called Sunday school way back, and you walk through some of these verses, you might be familiar with them. But here's what's really significant about what I'm about ready to read, is when it happened. And the story timeline of when this happened was at the end of Jesus' ministry. He's on his way to Jerusalem for the last time. He's about to die on the cross for the forgiveness of sins and rise on the third day, just like he said he would. This is when this story took place, and that's so significant for us to understand that. So Mark chapter 10, verse 13. People were bringing little children to Jesus to have him touch them. But the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant. He said to them, the disciples, "Let the little children come to me. Do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." And he took the children in his arms, put his hands on them, and blessed them. We're quick to jump to the part of, oh, this is just a cute little precious moment story of Jesus picking up the children in his arms, and isn't that beautiful? Did you see everything else that was going on? Let's walk through this together. Jesus loves touching people. He always touches people. He touches people emotionally, physically, spiritually. He leans in. He touches people. He does it with lepers. He does it with paralytics. He does it with people that are outcasts and downcast. He leans in and touches people all the time. That is Jesus' ministry model, to touch people. And so there's no doubt about it. He wants to touch the next generation too, but his disciples who ought to know better, the paparazzi police force of disciples, put up the lines around Jesus like he's a celebrity, like he's got better things to do. And as parents and children are coming Jesus' way, the disciples say, "Oh, no. Jesus is occupied right now. He's got stuff going on. You need to take a number. Maybe you may not get to him." And they put up the security force around Jesus. And what does Jesus do? Jesus is angry. Jesus rebukes them. He gets after them. And it's never a good idea when God rebukes you. That's not a good idea. But Jesus rebukes the disciples on the spot and says, "You're missing the mission. You're totally missing it, disciples who have been with me for 2+ years, heading into the third, probably in the last week, heading that direction. You're missing the whole thing." So he's indignant with them, the Bible says. He's annoyed, angry. He's grieving the decision the disciples are making on this spot to prevent the next generation from coming to know Jesus. Isn't that crazy? Shouldn't they know better? Like, just put yourself in their sandals for just a moment, and if you were there and you were one of the disciples and you think you're getting it right by keeping people away from Jesus, when Jesus is saying, "What are you doing? Take down the walls. I mean, let them come to me." Can you imagine the conversation the disciples, use your biblical imagination for a moment, it's not in the Bible, but can you imagine the disciples having this little conversation like, whose idea was that anyway? Peter? It's probably Peter's. You know, what's going on? Like, why would the disciples prevent small children and parents and families from coming to Jesus? Well, Jesus would eventually take the children into his arms and bless them, which is a tradition that it was happening for centuries that still happens today, because in Jewish communities, families bring their children to rabbis to have the rabbi bless the children. Similar in a similar kind of way of pastors and child dedications and that kind of thing. But Jesus, the disciples should have known better, and as he picks up these children and blesses them, he's speaking words of encouragement over them over and over and over again, and that's what he's doing right here. What a powerful picture this story is of Jesus' heart for the next generation, but also how the disciples get it tragically wrong. Well, let me ask you a difficult question. Let me lean in. Is it possible that we are hindering the next generation from coming to know Jesus? Is it possible that you, our church, the greater adult community, are, let me put a little caveat in this, directly or indirectly hindering the next generation from coming to know Jesus? And I believe the answer is yes. Yes, we are. We are, because of some things that we don't have knowledge about, that I'm going to share with you today, that we just don't know because we're ignorant, and we think we're doing the right thing, just like the disciples thought they were doing the right thing when they weren't doing the right thing, and so we might need to make some adjustments. So I want to help us along in this, because if we don't get the right diagnosis, we're not going to get the right prescription. You got to have the right diagnosis in order to get the right thing prescribed for us to move forward with solutions. So let me diagnose the issues and paint a picture for you with several areas for us to consider, areas where we might be hindering the next generation and not even know it. And then let's move on to some solutions. But first, let me diagnose the issue. Here are some areas to consider. Number one, generational differences are dividing us. Have you noticed? I'm going to toss myself into the older generation now. I'm 50 years old. Some of you are going to laugh at me and go, oh, no, you're still young. I don't care. It feels old. I got gray hair coming in. I'm feeling older, so I'm tossing myself up there. So I'm like you in the older crowd, where here I am on staff in this position, and in this position I have at Mission Hills, and I'm passionate about it. And here I am, and sometimes, every now and then, I'm just being honest, I get irritated by the next generation. Anybody else? No? Okay. Generational differences are dividing us. I mean, the older generation, in general, sometimes, maybe very rarely, will look down on the next generation and go, their language, their clothing, how often their heads are down staring at that device. I don't understand. And so the generational differences are dividing us. Once upon a time, there were teenagers running down a church hallway, and they made their way into the worship center right before the service was going to begin. And during this sermon, they were making a ruckus, talking to one another, doing their thing, and distracting. And the adults around them were getting really irritated with this group of teenagers because they couldn't hear the sermon from the pastor that was going to be really important. And so at the end of that whole service, a committee meeting, because that's what they called it back in the day, a committee meeting happened with these older adults that said, Pastor, we got to talk right now. So they take him into his office and say, did you hear those teenagers during your sermon? They're so disrespectful. I can't believe it. We've got an idea. How do we move them out of the worship service so they have their own space doing their own thing so they're not a distraction? The pastor said, well, we got a room at the end of the hallway they could have. They could paint it, decorate it, bring in furniture. They could do whatever they want to. They're like, that's an awesome idea. Who's going to volunteer to oversee that? A couple parents volunteer. They come up with a whole timeline of who's going to do what and where and when. And the next Sunday, that's what they did. And guess what? That's where youth ministry came from, everybody. True story. Now, I am all in favor. Trust me, we have a great staff team in Next Gen here, from kids all the way through young adults, who are doing tremendous things, because those generations need their own space to do some teaching, friendships, worship, all those things. But at what expense? At what expense have we, through decades, literally separated the next generation from the main body of church, from the main body of intergenerational ministry? It's because generations are different than one another and have a hard time getting along with one another. Number two, it's It keeps getting longer to grow up. It's taking longer to grow up. Have you noticed? There's a word for it. It's called adolescence. It literally means in the Latin to grow up. Because what we realized is, well, they're children and they're adults, but there's this middle space in between. We don't know quite what to do with them. They're not quite adults yet. They're not children, so we're going to call them adolescents. And psychosocial development came up with this word for this unique group of people that we all intuitively feel and know. Some of you might be here right now. And we know that, but we don't know what to do quite with that because they're not quite adults yet. They're on their way. We're helping them grow up. But if you're like me, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. Some of you probably a little younger, some of you a little older. And I remember when you hit 18, you were ready to go. You hit 18, you're ready to graduate, go to college, do whatever you're going to do. You're ready to launch and go. Well, things have changed now, haven't they? Some things have adjusted because it's taking longer for them to grow up. And the average start of adolescence is about 11 years old. We can measure it. We know for sure. And the way it ends, well, that's a little blurry, but it's probably the mid-20s. Why do I say that? Because of frontal lobe development on the brain, adolescent development issues, all the things. It's nobody's fault, but it's just stretching. But it's also no excuse for having responsibilities for them. It's just stretching and getting longer. Number 3, the pressure on kids to grow up faster is overwhelming. It's overwhelming. The anxiety on the next generation is off the charts, friends. All you have to do is go look up the statistics. Depression and suicide is off the charts. Unfortunately, it's tragic. Why is all that happening? I'm going to lean in with you, and you may not like me right now, but the reason there's more anxiety on the next generation is because of the older adults. We put pressure on them in mainly 2 main categories: grades and goals. Grades and goals. If they perform academically at a certain level, then the pressure's off. But if they don't, the anxiety goes up. Or if they score enough soccer goals or enough aces on the tennis court or volleyball or football or basketball, if they do pretty well, then they feel accepted and loved because they performed a certain way. But if they don't, the anxiety goes up. Trust me on this. I spend a lot of time with them. I did a focus group with them the last year during COVID with juniors and seniors at Mission Hills, and all I did is show up and ask questions and lean in and just listen to their answers. And it was amazing how transparent they were with me about those things because their anxiety level is off the charts. And it's because the older generations are putting this pressure for them to perform in different ways. And all they're asking, if you miss everything else I'm about to say, all they're wondering is who loves me for me and not based on what I do. That's all they're wanting to know. That doesn't mean grades and goals aren't important. That just means what they feel and the anxiety level is off the charts. Number 4, next generation friendships are changing. Have you noticed this? When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, maybe some of you can relate, friendships were formed this way with this word called cliques. Remember that word, cliques? It's changed today, everybody. It's changed today. Don't use that word anymore with the next generation. Don't use the word cliques. It's not true. I'll explain why. So it used to be that all the band members were friends, all the football players were friends, all the cheerleaders were friends, all those that stood on the corner at lunch were friends. You know what I'm talking about. All those people that were friends. And nobody would split into any other group. If you did, there'd be a fight that would break out after school. Like nobody switched groups. That's when I was growing up. Today, it's way different. Today, ask anybody in the next generation, they have a friend in every single one of those groups. They have a friend who's in band and in choir and on the football team and over here and over there. And so what's the common denominator? This is what researchers want to know. What's the common denominator? And the common denominator that everybody's discovered is safety, survival. We just want to get through this thing called life. So really, it can be illustrated in 2 different movies. The first movie would be the movie Grease. Remember that movie? You know, Sandy and Danny fall in love over the summer. Everything gets messed up. They come to school. Danny's part of the leather jacket crew, and you got the pink ladies, and you got the athletes over there. Danny tried to cross over. He couldn't do gym very well or shoot baskets. I mean, it all got chaotic because everybody was in their groups. And it's moved from Grease to a new movie called Hunger Games. It's true, everybody. Because what do they have in common? Let's get through this game without dying. You got my back, I got yours. We're gonna make an alliance. It's more gang-like, it's more family-like. And this is what adolescents are going through today. They're trying to figure out who's got my back and who cares about me for me. And they're not gonna put this pressure on to evaluate our relationship based on my performance. They just want people around them who can get through this thing called life together, survival mode. And then we'll see what's on the other side. Friendships have changed. Is it possible that we are hindering the next generation from coming to know Jesus? Number 5, the family system is broken. I don't need to tell you this, but it's tragic. It used to be on shaky ground, but now it's crumbling left and right, and we're redefining everything from family to sexuality. Marriages are falling apart, unfortunately, and parenting is distancing itself, especially during the adolescent years when they ought to be leaning in, even though it's uncomfortable and weird and you don't know how. You got to lean in closer, not distancing itself, especially fathers. Fathers, you have to lean in during adolescence. You have to. You have to. It's significant. And where's Bible study and prayer in the homes? Where instead of outsourcing it to the church to do all that, which we love doing and want to support, but where is it in the home where prayer is a regular thing? Like we don't know what to do. We got to go to God. We got to pray together. With and together, we're going to pray for what's going on and how to get through that. And we're going to open up the Bible in our homes and teach. And you may not know a ton about the Bible, but we're going to stretch into this and lean into this and grow together in this because we got to pass some things on to the next generation. Number 6, students have digital overload. Don't need to tell you that either. But I'm old enough to remember, you guys, when a research project in my home growing up was me going downstairs into the basement to the bookshelf to look at the encyclopedias. Remember what those are? And I'd pull one off the shelf and look up that word, and if I was lucky, there was a National Geographic around too, and that was my research paper. All the resources I had for the research paper came from that. That's it. I might go to a library, maybe, but today now, at your fingertips, you can Google search anything. You have no idea whether it's true or not, but you can Google search anything and drop that into a research paper, and there's some cool things that you can do with your phone or your computer, but there's a lot of negative things too. And the next generation might be filling their minds more with TikTok videos and Instagram likes than they are anything else, and that's where the frustration and time consumption and the digital overload comes into play. Number 7, the next gen is biblically illiterate. This breaks my heart. I want to do something about this. Because the next generation, I get the opportunity to go to camps and different places to speak, and the next generation, I discover along the way, almost every single time, it doesn't matter how great the church is, that the next generation does not know the stories of the Bible. They have no idea who any of these characters are. They don't know what came before and what came after. And so there's a lot of explaining up front before you even get to the thing you're going to talk about what's going on. They don't know who Joseph and Moses and David are. They don't know who Peter, Paul, and Mary are. Maybe some of you do. They don't know. And so how are we going to do that? How are we going to lean in and help them grow closer to Jesus? We need to know the Bible ourselves as the older generation, pouring into the younger and passing that on. We cannot outsource that to the church, families, parents, grandparents. We have to partner with you in order to do that, to help them grow closer to Jesus. Finally, number 8, this is all the bad news, is moral failure is habitual. It just is in the next generation. The goalposts have moved on where the line of morality is. They've moved. Netflix and chill is normal for the next generation. If you don't know what that is, ask somebody in the next generation. They might be too embarrassed to share with you, but probably not. They'll probably tell you. It's a normal deal to go too far in a relationship. It's normal. And then all on the backside of that whole thing, all the emotional damage that happens in the whole other thing, our team normally talks to those students and parents about that stuff. Because the line of morality has changed. It's no longer the biblical standard on things. It's moved. So here's the word that's changed. We've moved from holiness to what makes you happy. We've moved from holiness to what makes you happy. Happiness seems to be the word of the day for everybody. Are you happy in your job? Are you happy in your home? Are you happy in your marriage? Are you happy with your friendships? Are you happy at that Starbucks? You ought to because if you're not, just get out and do something else and go somewhere else because you're not happy. Listen, friends, The Bible doesn't say anything about happiness. It says to lean into holiness, and guess what? Happiness catches up. When you're pursuing Jesus with everything you have, with an old school biblical word, holiness, then you're going to be happy. Trust me. But the next generation has it all upside down, and the word holy isn't even in the vocabulary. They don't even know what that means. And so all of these things that I'm sharing with you are all the bad news. And I haven't even exhausted the list. All the things that are happening that we've piled up, and maybe, just maybe, we're hindering the next generation from coming to know Jesus. Everybody knows the flight experience. You know flying in an airplane what you do. You purchase a ticket, you go to the airport, you go get your boarding pass, you turn in your luggage if you have some baggage, you head through security, you head to the gate, you make sure the city that you're going to is the right gate number that you're going to go to, and you sit down, and you're probably all by yourself or with your family or whatever, and you're not probably talking to anybody else in the boarding area, but somehow they have this pecking order to get on the plane. That's weird. They get on the plane, and then we sit down, and you probably don't talk to anybody around you, and you're all going to the same destination though, and that's not too much different than coming to church on the weekends, is it? You know where you're going. This is the godly service, right? The most godly people come to this service, right? And so you come into this service and you sit down about the same place with about the same people around you, and you might say, hey, and you might remember a name, but you probably don't know their stories of the people sitting around you, and you haven't leaned in on that. So you're associating with the people around you just like you would be on a plane going to a destination, but you're not participating with them at the levels you should. And this is particularly true with the next generation. We associate with them. We pass them in the hallway, but we get past as fast as we can because we don't like what they're wearing or what they're doing or what they're talking about. We don't even know how to say hi or introduce ourselves as an older generation to the younger generation. So we're like passing ships in the night. We associate, but we don't lean in to participate. That has got to change, or listen, friends, I'm not overstating it. We're going to lose a whole generation. We're going to lose a whole generation unless we turn this thing around. And we lean in and we start participating at deeper levels and asking for somebody's name and hearing their story and find out who they're connected to and who their family is and what's going on and what grade in school are you and what are you struggling with. And we just listen and lean in. So what do we do about this? I want to turn a corner here in this message, and I want to talk to you about what we can do. How do we reach and keep the next generation? I think there are a few things we can do. Number one, pass them passion. Pass them passion. Where is the older generation's passion for Jesus? Where is the temperature level of following Jesus with reckless abandon? Because listen, the next generation is watching, and they want to know whether this following Jesus thing works. They want to know if it works in your marriage and in your family and in your parenting and at the gas station and at Walmart and how you interacted with that person who served you at lunch. And they want to know, does this thing connect with all of your life? Or is this just a compartment that you do on the weekends, but it doesn't really transfer over to everything else of your life? That's what they want to know. And if it doesn't connect in their minds to the rest of their life, they're out. Why in the world would they follow Jesus if it doesn't work? Listen, it really does work. But they want to know, they want to see it, they want to experience it, they want to watch. And we need to turn up the spiritual temperature of these things. The next gen is watching to see if our faith actually matters in all of these places. They want to know whether this thing they read about in the book of Acts in the New Testament of the Bible, when Jesus rose back from the dead, which is kind of a big deal, if that story, if it's true, and they catapulted the gospel around the world because of one story. By the way, all the sermons in the Bible in the New Testament are kind of boring, actually, because there's just one message. Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive. Hey, Jesus is alive. If Jesus is alive, it changes the world upside down. It changes everything because our faith is built on one event. And if that one event is true, our passion level ought to go up, don't you think? Don't you think our passion level ought to go up so the next generation catches that? Because listen, you can't teach passion. I say go spend as much time with Jesus as you possibly can. That's where your passion's gonna grow. But you can't teach it. There is no book out there. There is no step 1, 2, 3, and 4, and your passion's gonna grow. You can't do it because more is caught than taught. You can't teach passion, but you can catch it. You can catch it. You know the people in your life who poured into you, who are passionate about Jesus, and it was like a magnetic pull towards them. You wanted to spend more time with them. We can do that as parents and grandparents too. Where is the older generation who's been following Jesus for a long, long time, pouring into the next? Because, boy, if you've been following Jesus for decades and your passion level isn't off the charts, what in the world? Are you following the right Jesus? Because the one I know is alive. And therefore, we need to pass it on to the next generation. I mean, parents, you know that more is caught than taught. You know this because when they were little, when they were just toddlers, and that word slipped out of your mouth accidentally, you didn't think anything of it until a week later, your little toddler says that word, and you went, oh, where did you learn that word from? Oh, that was me. You know that. More is caught than taught. Pastors know this. I mean, do you remember the sermon 5 weeks ago? Probably not. Last week? Maybe. But do you remember, like, our mission statement is to become like Jesus and join him on mission? You probably remember that more because we bleed it. We talk about it. We are passionate about it. We say it all the time. More is caught than taught. It's just true. And so we've got to turn up the spiritual temperature in order to reach the next generation. Number 2, we need to grow them with grace. We need to grow them with grace. The church has spent way too much time in history worrying about the rules and the regulations and the laws, which leads to judgment on people's lives. We need to turn that around and grow them with grace. And I know what you're thinking as a parent or somebody who's been around the next generation or a teacher or a coach or whatever, and you go, that's really, really hard sometimes. You know, it's really, really hard to extend grace to them because have you seen what they're doing or what they're saying? Or, I get it. I know. I get it. But guess what? We were all that age once, and it's grace that brings people home, not laws and rules and regulations, every single time. So if we don't learn how to extend more grace, as opposed to trying to pour all of our energy into trying to demographically figure out the next generation so we can reach them with the gospel as best as we can, because if somebody wears the right skinny jeans and fog machines and light shows and all this stuff, then we can reach them with Jesus. And that all sounds great, you guys. And I love strategy, and I've read all the research on the next generation. Trust me, I love that stuff. But at the end of the day, are we giving them grace? Are we letting up a little bit, extending grace in all of these areas they feel anxiety in? Or are we putting the pressure on more for them to perform when all they're really asking, as I said, is whether somebody loves me for me or not? We need to extend more grace. This is part of the reason why in technology they move. They're a moving target. So as soon as you think something's cool, it's not cool anymore. They've moved. That's why they're not on Facebook anymore. Why? Because parents and grandparents are. They're moved over to Instagram. But now that I said that, they're going to get off Instagram. Oh, they're already at TikTok. And the reason they're on TikTok is because it's kind of weird. And people, the next older generation doesn't understand it. And even my own kids show me a lot of TikTok videos. And I'm like, I don't really get it. That's funny to you. I don't get it. Okay, I'm trying. But it's just scrolling through these videos that seem like nonsense. A lot of them are not great, appropriate behavior and whatever, but they're doing that. And the reason they're moving on social media is because they don't want the older generations around to judge them on what they're doing. Listen, we need to extend some more grace. And now, before you get tremendously mad at me, Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9 says this: "For it's by grace you've been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves, it's a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." Listen, we talk about these verses as it relates to salvation, and that's true. We need grace. Grace is the way, by faith, that we become a follower of Jesus. But we need the same grace that saved us to sustain us, to keep us going too every single day. After you come to know Jesus, you need the same grace to continue on. How much more does the next generation need that same kind of grace? Number 3, we need to hold them with holiness. Now some of you are leaning in. Holiness. Like we need to hold them with holiness. Listen, we can't move the bar, as I said, or the goalposts around morality. We have to hold firm to what the Bible teaches around these things. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13 says, Therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace, there's that word, to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance, that is, before you came to know Jesus, but just as he is